everyone, welcome to my channel. Today I'm super excited to share two different uniquely flavored herb salt recipes. This is a fantastic way to use fresh herbs from the garden. They add a burst of flavor to your dishes and they make for great gifts too. The two flavors I'm making today is a basil salt and the other one is a garlic herb salt. If you're new here, my name is Jara. I teach people how to garden and grow their own food. So this YouTube channel is dedicated to my gardening endeavors. But every now and then I like to share some of my recipes or food preservation methods to give ideas on how to use up things harvested from the garden. So what exactly are herb salts? It's essentially a blend of salt and herbs which is dried in a food dehydrator to create a seasoning. It can be used to season everything from meats and veggies to popcorn and fries. The best part is you can customize the flavors to suit your tastes. Plus, using a food dehydrator ensures that your herbs are dried perfectly, preserving their flavor and color. Before we get started, let's go over the supplies that you will need. First up, you're going to need a food dehydrator. I'm blending fresh herbs that have a lot of water content that needs to be removed so that the herb salts will store away for a long time. I'm using London Sunshine brand 6-tray food dehydrator. This thing works perfectly and I like its medium size instead of a huge bulky food dehydrator. You can get 10% off this food dehydrator by using my code and link below in the description. Next, you're going to need some coarse salt. My preference is to use coarse sea salt or coarse Celtic salt, but it doesn't matter just as long as it's coarse. You also need some sort of little containers to store away your herb salts. I got these really cute little mini glass containers from Amazon. These are just perfect if you want to give them away as gifts. You will need a really good blender. I'm using a Ninja blender. And finally, you're going to need some herbs or the ingredients for each herb salt flavor depending on which of the two you want to make. The ingredient quantities and directions for both recipes are listed out on my website, or you can follow the link in the description so I can email you a free printable PDF recipe card. I highly recommend you have all of the ingredients and supplies out and ready to go. When it comes to the herbs, I like to harvest them in the early morning and soak them in some water for a few minutes. This will basically suffocate any pests or insects that might be on them. Then strain and dry. First, let's set our food dehydrator temperature so it can start getting warmed up. I'm gonna set this one to 131 degrees Fahrenheit. And for the time, we're gonna set it to 3 hours at first. You might need a little bit more time just depending on how well it dries out. All right, so let's get that heated. Let's start working on the basil salt by removing the leaves off from the stems. We just want to collect the leaves. For both of these recipes, we're going to use a ratio of about 2 cups of fresh herbs for every 1 1/4 cup of salt. You might have to adjust that a little bit. The final consistency of the mixture should kind of feel like wet beach sand. So you might have to add a little bit more herbs if it's too dry, or a little bit more salt if it's too wet. Add all of your ingredients into your blender. All right, there's our basil. Let's add our salt. So we need 1 1/4 cup of coarse salt. All right, now we're ready to blend this all together. Now, some of you might be thinking, why don't I dry the herbs first before blending it with the salt? The reason for that is because I feel when the herbs are fresh, they have that moisture in there that helps release their flavor and really coat and mix better with the salt. Also, it gives a really nice, pretty color that you would not get if you blended the dry herbs with the salt already. It's all blended up. I did have to take this off the blender, shake it up a little bit, and keep putting it back on just to help get everything really nice and blended. I can already smell this. It smells so intense. All right, so the next step is to pour this out onto your trays that slide into the food dehydrator. This unit did come with one tray that was like solid without any holes in it, but I'm gonna be filling this entire thing with herb salts. I'm making quite a few today. So I had to put pieces of parchment paper over the trays so that way, obviously, your salts don't fall through. So I just cut a couple sheets of parchment paper to fit the trays. This food dehydrator fits 6 trays, so you can do a lot at once. And we just pour this out. Man, that smells so good. And just to show you the texture we're looking for, it's supposed to look like some wet beach sand. I'm gonna use a spatula to kind of just spread this out in a really thin layer. All right, we got this all nice and flat. Now it's time to put it in the food dehydrator. All right, for this next herb salt, my son here is gonna help me. This is a great activity to do with kids. This is a garlic herb salt. So I'm gonna start peeling this garlic while he takes the leaves off from the stems for these herbs. We have sage, chives, and rosemary. All right, so for the rosemary, you're just gonna pull off these little smaller leaves here. This is sage. We just want the leaf pieces, so you just pinch it off there and put the leaves in there. And this is chives. You don't need to cut this or nothing. Just put it in there, okay? So just put a combination of those 3 in there. For this garlic herb salt, I'm just gonna add the cloves of 1 entire bulb of garlic. If you don't like garlic, you can skip it and just put the fresh herbs. All right, Roland has all of our fresh herbs ready to be blended. Here's the cloves, all out of 1 entire garlic bulb. First, let's put our salt in here. We have 1 1/4 cup of salt, so let's put that in first. Next, put the garlic. And finally, we put in our herbs. All right, so our garlic and herb salt is ready to be dried. Let's get one of the trays, put the parchment paper over it. Dump it out and smooth it out into one thin layer. And then put it in the dehydrator to dry out. Both of these are gonna dry for at least 3 hours. At that point, we'll check up and see if it needs more drying time. All right, so it's been 3 hours and everything was perfectly dry with just 3 hours time. So now we gotta get this into a nice fine salt, which means I have to put it back in the blender. For me, it's just a little bit easier to pick up the parchment paper like this and kind of funnel it into a bigger bowl, and then from there, put it into the blender. All right, then I can put it back into the blender. Sometimes it helps to break it up just a little bit so it will just flow into the blender. Try to be as careful as possible so I don't get any of it spilled outside of the blender. And blend it until it's a nice fine powder. It's all blended up. When I bought this set of glass jars, it came with little labels for each one and this small funnel. To kind of pour it easily into the funnel, I use one of these like bendable plastic cups. I'm just gonna pour this in here. Then we start filling the jars. And just to give you guys an idea of how much final product I ended up with, for every 1 tray of the basil salt, I ended up with 3 of these 4-ounce containers. And for every tray of the garlic and herb salt, I ended up with 3 full ones and a 4th that's almost completely full. And again, these are 4-ounce size jars. So made a lot of seasoning for just 1 tray. Now that we're done making the herb salts, let's talk about storage. If stored in airtight jars or containers, it should last for about a year if kept in a cool, dry, dark place. I like to label mine with the date and flavor so I know what I've got at a glance. These herb salts are so versatile. Sprinkle them on roasted veggies, mix them into salad dressings, or even use them as a finishing touch on grilled meats. One of my favorite things to do is mix any of these 2 herb salts with some butter, then I spread it over some toast, or I add a few pieces over some salmon before I air fry it. I hope you enjoyed learning how to make my recipes for basil salts and garlic herb salts. If you have any ideas for herb salt flavor combinations, please let me know in the comments. I have a few videos for other flavored herb salts and how I use them. You can find all of the videos in my recipe playlist right here. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss any of my gardening and recipe videos. Happy cooking, everyone.